All right, good morning. And this is the Sexual Assault Response Team panel. We are excited to have everybody on today and hope to share some good information so that our students and our campus community know a little bit more about the resources that are available to them and the support that is out there. So I'm going to start by asking everybody who's here on the panel to introduce yourself, give your name, your job title, and then just describe a little bit your role as a member of SART. And so Joey, let's start with you.
Okay, good morning. I'm Joey Rice. I'm the detective for Murray State University Police Department. My role as a SART member is to respond upon receiving any reports of sexual assaults that occurred on Murray State's campuses. Based upon the nature of the investigation, I would notify the other needed members of the SART team and begin the investigation.
Okay, and Angie.
Hi, I am Angie Trespass. I'm the Director of University Counseling Services, and my role is to be sure that survivors of sexual violence are aware of our services, know how to access them, know what we can do for them. Not every survivor is going to want or need therapy, but many recognize that it can be part of their healing process, so we want to let them know that it's available.
And then any of our Lotus members that want to speak and introduce themselves.
I'll go first. I am Nikki Gray, and I am the SART coordinator. And I view my job as bringing all of the partners to the table to ensure that there's a proper response to sexual assault.
I'll go next. My name's Bethany Vaughn, and I'm the Sexual Violence Resource Center, which is one of our entities at Lotus, service coordinator. And I work with Nikki and Corey and Renee in really doing a lot of scheduling and checking in with folks. I also am able to provide advocacy through crisis response, just in general at Lotus, to make sure that people are getting connected with resources that they might be interested in receiving.
I'll go next. My name is Corey Edmondson. I'm the Sexual Violence Resource Center advocate, and like Bethany, I provide crisis response and then also help our survivors just get in touch with those resources that really help them heal and grow from their experiences.
Thank you all. And my name is Abigail Cox, and I'm the coordinator of the Women's Center here on campus. And my role on SART is to connect students with all of their options and resources, whether that be here on campus with the Counseling Center or PD or the Title IX office, or off campus with our Lotus partners and members. So thank you everybody for introducing yourselves. So we're going to start with a question for PD. And
Abigail,
Yes.
I'm sorry. We have our director on, Renee.
Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped right over you. Go ahead. Oh, we can't hear you. Nope.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay. So I'm Renee Mitchum. I am the SVRC program director and legal advocate for our Lotus adult and older adolescent survivor program. My job is to make sure that all the ladies who run SART and provide the advocacy and the therapeutic support for any of our clients have what they need to make all of that happen and to give good support to survivors in the community.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to start with our first question for our police department. One common question is from students when they are reporting is, what happens after I report? So after I come in and I talk with the police department, what happens after that? So Joey, can you talk just a little bit about what they can expect at that point?
Yeah, sure. About reporting, first, Murray State Police Department, we strongly encourage all survivors to report to us. Sexual assault is a crime, and we believe it should be handled in that manner. So upon receiving a report of a sexual assault, the investigation division will open a case. Sometimes the officer might conduct an initial interview of the survivor, and a more, I guess, thorough interview will be conducted at a later time with the detective. So during the investigation, I'll offer several resources to the survivor during or after the interview, and the members of the SART are notified and activated if needed at that time. The team, the SART team really ensures that the survivor is safe and that they have an advocate, that the healing process has begun through counseling services. So they're very beneficial. I'd like to mention that none of those services will be forced upon the survivor, and the survivor has the choice to accept or reject any of those resources. After the interview, myself or others will need to collect evidence of the sexual assault wherever that took place at. And this evidence includes taking photographs of the scene or collecting any physical evidence that may be present. I guess during the investigation or immediately following it, I'll consult with the local prosecutor on how to proceed. And then I'll reach back out to the survivor to provide them with an update for follow-up.
So just to kind of follow up a little bit on what you're talking about. So when somebody comes in and they make that initial report, what options do they have at that point? I know that a lot of students don't always realize the difference between like a report and then, filing charges. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when they come in to make a report, usually when they come to the police department instead of another department on campus, at that point, a criminal investigation does occur. Now, it's always the reporter's option whether they pursue charges or not. Sometimes that's at the beginning of the investigation they decide that, or sometime throughout. But myself and the local prosecutor, they'll reach out to the reporter in that instance and ask what they want to do involving that.
And then sometimes I know our students, they come to you all initially because you're here on campus and, you're who they're familiar with in terms of thinking about the police. But sometimes during that interview, you find out that maybe this occurred in a different jurisdiction. So can you talk a little bit about how you handle that and how it goes from there?
Yeah, we try to make it as easy as possible for the reporter. So if we find out it happened in another jurisdiction, like say in the city instead of on Murray State's campus, we can reach out to Murray Police Department. Instead of making the reporter drive over there, we'll usually have an officer or a detective from their agency come to our office and speak to them, in the conference room or something, wherever they're comfortable at. If it's another jurisdiction outside of Callaway County, we'll contact that agency and give them a heads up. And then the reporter needs to go there to report, and we'll give them directions and offer those assistances.
Yeah,
now, I would like to add that, as you said, if they come in and report to us, because we're kind of the first stop a lot of times, we offer all those resources. So if they want not to go through the criminal investigation, then we have other options on campus with counseling in the Women's Center and Title IX that they can speak to as well.
Yeah, and I think that's just really important for students to understand and know that if they connect with you, and then in the process of talking with them, you find that they need to connect with somebody else, that you will, assist and help them reach out to the person that they do need to speak with. Because I think a lot of times, especially here on campus, students reach out to, whoever they're most familiar with, most comfortable with. And it's important for them to see that, all of those connections are made, after that initial contact. So we're going to move on to our second question for the Counseling Center. And, a lot of times students who don't wish to make a report, they still need support. They still need to process what's happened, and they still need to speak with somebody. So Angie, can you describe when and how students might recognize that counseling support would be a good option for them?
Sure. Like you said, sometimes students decide to seek our services right away. Other times they only come to us later after they have sort of started to recognize the negative effect that the experience has had on their lives. Some students never come and talk to us. Sometimes it's because they have supportive family or friends, or they have a counselor back at home or something. Or other times they just aren't ready to talk about it to anybody yet. And then we have some students who come right away and then they kind of take a break, and then later they come back after they start to notice how it's affecting them. Sometimes they just need to process immediately what happened and why it happened and how it happened, and helping them understand that it's not their fault and that they didn't do anything to be blamed for, things like that. Other times they might come to us months or years later when they realize that they have kind of internalized their experiences, and now they're struggling to trust people, or they're not comfortable having an intimate relationship with their partner, or their self-concept has been significantly impacted by what happened to them. For example, I had one client ask me, why would anyone want to date me? I'm damaged goods. And we talked about this, and I kind of said to her, if you'd been in a car accident and you broke your leg or you had nerve damage, would that also make you damaged goods? Would that also make you undateable? And just looking at it from that new and different perspective kind of helped her realize how much this experience had affected her and changed the way she thought about herself. And so then it started helping her to think about herself differently.
Yeah, and I think you're making, a really good point. A lot of times students might not reach out right away, or they might reach out to PD or to the Title IX office and make a report, but not reach out maybe to counseling right away. But then, later on decide that maybe they need to process further. And a lot of times they may not even recognize that they're struggling, but maybe their professor does, or their sorority sister or fraternity brother, or the different people in their life here on campus may say, hey, like, have you thought about talking with somebody, and make that connection there. So talking a little bit more about to the people who might be noticing those things in other people and want to make a referral. Can you talk a little bit about like how they might approach that, or what they might say if they are concerned about somebody, to sort of suggest coming to the counseling center?
Sure. I think that, you want to be kind of careful about that. You don't want to immediately say, oh, you need counseling, because some people take that as a rejection, meaning, oh, I don't want to talk about this. This is a yucky subject. Don't bring this up with me. Go talk to somebody else about it. Or they might think, oh, that means there's something significantly wrong with me because only people with mental health problems go talk to counselors, which of course is not true. People with all kinds of perfectly regular, normal, everyday problems come and talk to counselors all the time. But so I would probably say, if at all possible, depending on your relationship with the individual, try first to just be there to support them and listen to them and remind them that they're okay and it wasn't their fault, and that, that you still appreciate them and support them. But then if it seems like it's really impacting their life and it's interfering with their ability to function or interfering with their social relationships or something like that, that's probably a time where you can say, I would love to help you, but I'm not an expert in this, and I think there are other people who could help you more than I can. And then encourage them to reach out and talk to us. Sometimes we have professors that will not tell the student, and then will just reach out to me and say, hey, can you reach out to the student? And I can, but the student is much more likely to respond to me reaching out to them if their friend or professor or family member has suggested counseling first, because they're much more likely to listen to that person that they know and trust than some stranger sending them an email saying, hey, we have counseling on campus, want to come see us?
Right. Thank you. Really good information. So we've talked about reporting, we've talked about counseling on campus, and Lotus also provides therapy services and counseling, but you guys also are able to offer a lot of additional types of support. So would you all mind to share what some of these other types of support might look like for those of our students who may just only think of counseling?
I'll go first. So we are, like Abigail said, able to provide that therapeutic aspect as well. However, we also provide what we kind of group into advocacy services. And that can range from legal advocacy, so maybe working with Renee a little bit, kind of talking about the criminal justice process, talking about how attorneys ask questions, especially if a case does look like it's going to continue to move forward in that process, to the point of what we would call like a jury trial, kind of what you see on TV, that SVU, Law and Order SVU. It doesn't actually look like that. It's much calmer, much quieter. But that's just, I think, a picture that everybody sees a lot and maybe comes to mind. So we can help in that process, providing just kind of supportive advocacy and working with prosecutors. Joey mentioned talking with our local prosecutors earlier. So we work really closely with our regional prosecutors. There's one for each county. A couple of the counties that are smaller have like one together. So here in Callaway, working with that team. And it could just look like attending a meeting with someone. Oftentimes, like Joey mentioned, those prosecutors want to get to know that survivor and get to know that client. And so they will ask them to come to their office just to kind of ask questions, get to know that person. And so we can attend those types of meetings. Here recently, we've been doing those on Zoom. So just attending and being supportive. We also can do what we call court prep. A lot of my experience is working with like younger kiddos and doing that, but that can translate to working with older adolescents as well as adults, because that can feel really overwhelming, and we know that. And so kind of practicing, right? Getting ready, talking about some of those questions that might be a little bit more difficult to answer, especially when you're in a courtroom. The way that the criminal justice system is set up in Kentucky, the court doesn't differentiate between victim and witness. They are one and the same here in our criminal justice system. And so oftentimes that survivor may have to share their story and share their experience. And so we do as much work as we can to help that survivor feel as comfortable as possible in sharing that experience. We also can help provide connection and also work when it comes to protective orders. So we work with a lot of our system-based victims advocates. So in our prosecutors' offices, they have a victims advocate who helps the survivor stay up to date on times and dates and hearings and different things. And so we can work with them to help make sure that if someone is interested in a protective order, they're able to make sure that they get to the correct courthouse. That hearing itself can also feel a little uncomfortable. It's in a much smaller court setting, but oftentimes it would be survivor and possible perpetrator that are in that hearing together. And so we can attend those hearings. We can help fill out the paperwork to get to that hearing. Working with organizations like Legal Aid to make sure that if someone is interested in having legal, I don't want to just say advocacy, but legal representation, that we can help get them connected with that as well. A couple of years ago, the state of Kentucky developed a new protective order that is more specific to survivors of sexual violence. It's called an interpersonal protective order. often referred to as IPO. And so we can help folks make sure that they get that correct paperwork and then work on getting that a little bit more specific than an emergency protective order or domestic violence order. Those are the other two that we have here in Kentucky. That's kind of my thoughts and kind of my notes on some of those other services that we're able to provide. Renee, Corey, anybody have anything else they would like to put in there?
So I know that you guys also offer sort of on the front end of things, hospital advocacy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know that's something that our students definitely appreciate, but are not aware of for the most part.
Yeah, so one of the other things that Detective Rice mentioned earlier is collecting evidence. And so all 5 of our regional hospitals here in the furthest part of Western Kentucky are able to offer what is called a SAFE kit, the sexual assault forensic exam. And oftentimes survivors, if you recently experienced an assault and you start Googling, it's like looking at WebMD. You're going to get a lot of information. And some of that information we'll talk about completing a SAFE kit. It also used to be called a rape kit, which that to me can sound really harsh. And so they worked on that name and transitioned it to SAFE kit. And so there are trained nurses at each of these regional hospitals that are a little bit more trained in collecting that forensic evidence. When it comes to cases of sexual violence, oftentimes that can be really important to have if that is something that survivor chooses to do. It's 100% their choice. They can go to the hospital to look at that SAFE kit, to go ahead and complete it. And that can be a large portion of evidence that is collected in a report of sexual violence. And again, 100% their choice. Murray-Calloway County Hospital has several nurses that have completed that training and so are able to move through that kit in a faster pace than maybe a nurse who hasn't done that kit. We know that it can be traumatizing, and so, well, I say traumatizing, re-traumatizing to go through that experience. And so we are able to provide advocacy at the hospital when someone does choose to go and do that kit. Here in the last year or so, we have, with COVID, have been doing a lot of that over the phone. We recently placed iPads at each of our local hospitals to be able to do more of a video chat. But we're also working on getting back into that in-person advocacy. And so we would meet with a survivor at the hospital. We provide them with a little bit of resource and a little bit of information, and then pretty much can stay with them throughout the time that they are at the hospital to make sure that their needs are met when they are there, and then helping them get connected with resources that might be supportive of them afterwards.
Really good information for our students to know. I know that sometimes just going, somewhere is that biggest step. It's, that's a big step for our students to take, especially if it's off campus. And so to know that when they get there, there is support available, I think is really important. So Joey, I did have another question for you. And this is just sort of about how students might prepare ahead of time before coming in to speak with you. Because speaking with law enforcement can be stressful. It can be overwhelming, not because, necessarily anyone is upset or angry or not believing or anything like that, but just because you have to ask a lot of questions and give a lot of answers, and it can be a lengthy process and difficult to talk about. So how can you sort of help students understand, maybe what that process might look like, how they might prepare, so that when they get there, they do have the information that they need and they sort of are prepared to participate in that process with you?
Yeah, like you said, it is very stressful reporting. There's a lot of emotions that come along with that. And we recognize that. I recognize that. So, that the interview, it's going to proceed at the pace of the reporter. Every case is different, so it's impossible to really say exactly what to bring or what to prepare for, because I can't predict what I want to ask for each particular case. But I could give some suggestions. Sometimes it's very difficult to remember all the details at first of an assault. So just as I guess details come to you as you recall them, just jot down some notes. Some details or memories might come at a later date. So I keep a line of communication open between myself and the survivor to contact me, by phone or by email whenever they remember a certain detail. Our preference is obviously an immediate report. These type of cases are very difficult to investigate the more the time that's lapsed. So the sooner the better to call us and report this and come into our office. We suggest leaving everything the way you left it at the location of assault. This will assist us with the collection of any evidence. And we further ask that survivors do not do any personal hygiene or laundry, as it can destroy physical evidence. And some other recommendations: social media is becoming very popular with these type of cases, and communication by text messaging and stuff. So keep any text messages, phone records, social media contacts back and forth of any communication between the survivor and perpetrator. If something was done, say on Snapchat, I would recommend taking a screenshot of the perpetrator's profile pic, their username and profile name, in case that account gets deactivated or suspended. That will assist us in the investigation. So, I mean, anything that you can document along the way for social media or text messages would greatly assist us with that.
Yeah, I know with most of the students that I talk with and who consider reporting, just all the different methods of communication and helping them to think through, okay, were there text messages, were there emails, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and usually, just sort of working through that list, they do think of something, oh yeah, like we had communication here or there that they might not think of right away. But I know that those messages always really help, the investigation out. And so just important for students to know to keep those things. I always kind of tell students when I'm talking with them, I know that it's, maybe not pleasant to keep those things on your phone, but they're important. They're so incredibly important. And so you want to be able to, even if you don't want to keep it on your phone, go ahead and email it to the police officer, print it out and, put it in a folder somewhere or something to document it and to keep it, because it is, like you said, a big part of a lot of these cases, especially on campus, it seems like. And so then I wanted to go back to Lotus and talk a little bit more about advocacy and the role that advocacy plays in the reporting process. And Bethany, you've already talked about this a little bit, but can you talk more just about why it's so helpful and why it can be so empowering for students to have an advocate during that reporting process, especially knowing how stressful it can be for students?
Yeah, I think like you and Joey said, it is very stressful. And while our survivors are talking to law enforcement, they are retelling their story. And this can also mean that they're often reliving that trauma. And so as advocates, we're there just to provide that, just help with grounding and really provide that extra support that our survivors might need. I think it can help knowing that as advocates, we, kind of do this all the time. So with our survivors, knowing that it can provide a little bit of support there. And we just like to make sure that our survivors are being treated with respect and try to help eliminate some of those feelings of victim blaming and things like that.
Yeah, and as everybody has kind of alluded to, a little bit, during that process, you're being asked questions, you're trying to produce information, you're dealing with your emotions. You're, processing all of the different steps that you need to take or have taken. And so it's easy, I think, for things to, if you're sitting there by yourself for the first time interacting with that process, it's easy to forget things or not understand something, but not really want to ask and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about how the advocate sort of fills those gaps and sort of helps to manage all of that information?
Yeah, I think typically when people are reporting, they try to have at least one support. And sometimes your friends or family members that go with you, maybe they're also nervous to talk to law enforcement because of the stress. And so really just having that advocate that's been there and has kind of done that can be very helpful, like you said, to fill in the gaps. And maybe Bethany, if you have some other ideas, she's our pro advocate, I'd say. So if you want to add anything on that.
One of the analogies that I think of when it comes to reporting to law enforcement is painting a picture. So you need your canvas, you need your paint, you need your paintbrush, you need your palette. And that can be a lot of information, especially when you have trauma brain. And we know a lot more now about trauma, the way that it affects the brain. And so kind of having that advocate there to maybe help stay on track, even bringing up things like sensory details. Do you remember what you were smelling? Do you remember specific things? Because we know that that interview and that moment can be really, really tough. I know I've gone to police stations to meet with survivors and law enforcement. We have invited law enforcement to come to our office to meet with survivors. I would say like coffee shop or somewhere like that, but that can be overwhelming too. And especially if you're sharing like a very detailed story and description of your experience, that may not be a good fit. And so kind of helping that survivor figure out what is a good fit. Oftentimes, I would on campus, especially like if it occurred in a dorm room, I would say that may not be the most comfortable place to have that conversation. It might be more comfortable to meet at the station, or it might be more comfortable to meet at a Lotus office. And so just really working with survivors to make sure that they are comfortable in painting that picture.
Mm-hmm. And I know too, just having someone else there who is listening and processing all of that information, just because, you so often do have to interact with more than one agency in more than one place, and they may ask you questions about, well, what did they ask you here? What did they tell you there? Or, maybe they have told you, okay, when you meet with this person, you need to do this. And just all of that information can kind of get overwhelming. And I think, having an advocate who can sort of help to map that out for you and help make sure that all of those steps sort of get included in your plan can be super helpful. And so definitely want to make sure that our students know that whether they're reporting off campus or reporting to PD or reporting to Title IX, that an advocate can be more than just a support person like a friend or a family member, but someone who really helps them to manage that process throughout is really important. So Angie, I did want to come back to you and just ask you to talk a little bit about how the counseling center is a little bit different than some of our other, or well, a lot different really, than our other resources, because it is a confidential option here on campus, whereas our other campus areas and departments are not. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So most people on campus, if they're in any position of authority over students, that means that they are mandated reporters. So if they hear anything about a sexual assault, they have to report it to Title IX. But counselors are exempt from that requirement, which means that when students come to talk to us, they can share as little or as much information as they like, and they don't have to worry if they tell us everything that we're going to turn around and be required to share that information with anybody else. If they decide after talking to us that they do maybe want to talk to Title IX or talk to the police, we can help them decide how and when to do that and what they want to say and whether they want to contact an advocate to go with them first and different things like that. But when they're talking to us, they can share whatever they want and or not share whatever they want, and they don't have to worry about us needing to collect more details or needing to do anything on a certain timeline because we have to report within a certain deadline or anything like that. So it's a safe place where they can come and talk or not talk about whatever they want to say, and we can help them with that process.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction for our students to understand, because I think, you know, our students hear a lot about mandated reporting, and they hear a lot about, you know, they hear from their professors, or they hear from maybe other faculty and staff on campus, you know, if I hear this information, then I do have to report it. And so what we don't want to happen is for that to mean that students don't tell anyone or don't talk to anyone because they aren't sure yet what they want to do. And so knowing and understanding that they do have options to come and speak with a counselor confidentially without a report being made, I think is very encouraging for some students, because they can come and sort of process, you know, what their options are and ask questions and get more information and make an informed decision about reporting. And I think anytime, you know, they're able to feel more informed, they feel more empowered. And that encourages them to maybe make a report that they wouldn't have considered making before. And so I think it is really important for our students to understand that they do have that option to come and ask those questions and get that information in a confidential space without fear of it being reported before they're ready. I think that's a fear. A lot of times, I think a lot of students, you know, have in mind that they're interested in reporting, but they want more information first. They want, you know, to feel more prepared about it first. And so that's a really important piece of that process. So I just wanted to give everybody.
Can I add something, Emma?
Yeah, go ahead.
Also, earlier when I was talking about it, I said, you know, if somebody comes and talks to you, be supportive first. Don't just direct them, you know, right away to the counseling center. But in this case, I would sort of give the opposite. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to report that I was sexually assaulted. If you are a mandated reporter, you might want to stop them right then and say, hey, before you tell me anything, do you want to tell me because I'm going to have to report it? Or do you want to go over to the counseling center and tell them, because then you can decide later if you want to report it. But if you tell me, I've got to report it. So that case is a little bit different in terms of direct them to us right away instead of waiting until it's too late and now you have all this information that you have to report because you're mandated reporting.
Right, right. And I know our faculty and staff have asked lots of questions about how do I do that? How do I do that in a way that, you know, doesn't make it sound like I don't care, but, you know, lets the student sort of know right away what could happen or what will happen if they share that information. And so that's a really good point. Did anybody else have anything on that they wanted to say before we move on? Okay. So I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to just sort of share a parting message for survivors, for students, for the campus, who may need services in the future. I think a lot of times, you know, when we're talking with students, they don't need our services yet. And so a lot of the, you know, details can kind of go over their head. But if you had like one parting message that you want them to remember about your services, what would that be? And we'll start with Lotus.
I'll go first. We want the campus, the students to know that there is an entire team dedicated to their safety, healing, and justice. Everyone that's sitting at this table right now is here to be sure that whatever their justice looks like is achieved. So, you know, we're here to meet you where you are.
Is anyone else from Lotus?
I don't know if we need to.
It's a really great point, wasn't it? It's a great parting message. All right, Angie.
Well, I would just want to make sure that all students know that counseling services are available on campus for all enrolled students. Our services are free, they're confidential. We can help you process and heal from your own sexual assault, or we can help you work through if you have had to deal with a friend or family member's experience, or have been impacted by sexual violence in any other way. And we can also talk about any other mental health issues that may or may not be related to sexual violence at any time. We are open year round now. And so we're here and available, and it's free.
Joey.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here today. From a law enforcement perspective, if you take anything away from this meeting, just know that it's important to report any incidents of sexual assault to us. It is a crime and it should be treated as such. And know that if you're a survivor and you're watching this, this is not your fault, and I will never place blame on a survivor. If you have any questions, you can contact us. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can go on our Murray State Police website by just Googling Murray State University Police. We have a contacts page. It has my email address on there. You're feel free to reach out and ask any questions you have. And I would also like to mention we have a Live Safe app that students can download on their phone, and it's a great app. It's got good resources on there, and it's a great way to contact Murray State Police Department, even through a chat feature that they can stay anonymous on.
And I'd just like to say on behalf of the Women's Center, I always like to tell students, you don't have to know what your questions are, and you don't have to know what your next steps are. All you need to know to come to the Women's Center is that you need to talk to somebody, or that you're in need of some type of support. And our role is to help figure out and get you connected to whatever is the most appropriate for you. Whether that's reporting, whether that's counseling, whether that's another service that we've talked about. We want to help students figure out what is their next best step that's right for them, and help them make that informed choice. And I just want to thank everybody for being on here today and for sharing what you're doing. Bethany, you look like you had something you wanted to say. Okay. I just want to thank everybody for sharing the information that you have. I think it's really great information for our students, especially to see us all together and hear from all of us how we work together, and how what we do is related and interconnected. And so just thank you all for that. We will be sharing this recording later on our YouTube and social media accounts and all over the place, I'm sure. So you can share it and watch this at a later date as well. So thank you all for joining us, and I appreciate each and every one of you.